I just can't believe how those people suffered during World War II.
World War
And before
II
then.
And
And after.
with
Oh,
communists.
unbelievable.
Okay, we are about ready.
All right.
Okay. Start.
I'm just giving a little bit of time on the tape,
Okay.
so we have some leeway. But, okay,
Okay.
whenever you're ready.
This is the first interview of the oral history project of the senior lawyers of the State Bar of New Mexico. And we hope that we will interview so many of our prominent attorneys who have given so much to the legal profession in our state. Our interviewee today is John Robb, who is a founder of the law firm of Rohde, Dickerson, Sloan, Aiken, and Robb.
May I correct you right there? I didn't found it in 1883.
No, we know that. Okay, was a member of
Yes.
a partner of the law firm.
I'm not that old, really.
Okay, Rohde, Dickerson, Sloan,
Okay.
Aiken, and Robb. And this will be the first of the series, and we are honoring John Robb because of his contributions to the legal profession, both in New Mexico and nationally. John, when were you born?
I was born on January 11th, 1924.
And so how old are you now?
I am 82 years old.
Okay, and where
But I feel more like 62.
Well, that's wonderful. Where do you live?
I live on North Rio Grande Boulevard in Albuquerque.
How long have you lived there?
45 years.
Could you tell us a little bit about your parents?
Yes. My father was a New York lawyer. We lived on the East Coast in a suburb of New York City, and he practiced law there for a number of years. But his interest in music, he was a composer for many, many years, as a sideline, became a dominating interest in his life. And in 1941, he made the decision to come out to the University of New Mexico and head up the music department there. And after having studied with a lot of noted composers before then who had encouraged him to give up his law practice and to go ahead and do that. So at the age of 49, he pulled up stakes, scrapped his law practice, and we came out here.
And how about your mother?
My mother was born and reared in Peoria, Illinois, and she came from a merchant's family there. She attended Smith College, and she met him during the World War I, and they had a brief courtship. And as he was going overseas, he had proposed to her, and she had delayed answering him, and finally she sent a telegram to him, care of the commanding officer of the Port of New York. So he was summoned from his troopship to the office of the commanding general, thinking he was going to be disciplined for something. And that wire said, "I love you and will marry you, Harriet." So that's how that came. She was very interested in music, very interested in the arts. She established a music school in Pelham where we were ponying up to being involved with a Diller Quayle school, as I'm trying to say, in New York City, and which is a very well-known music school. So she was very active there. She was an athlete. She played tennis. She was kind of an all-American woman.
Do you have siblings?
Yes.
Would you tell us about your brothers and sisters?
Yes, I have two sisters. My elder sister is in St. Louis, Priscilla Robb McDonald, and she's a singer of some note. Also was quite an athlete. She was involved with diving as a particular sport that she had, figure skating. She even went into some of the Olympic tryouts. And she also had a noted career in New York City as a singer and studying with Queen Mario, who was a wonderful singer at Juilliard School of Music. And then she married Sandy McDonald and moved to St. Louis. And she continued with her career. She soloed with the St. Louis Symphony Orchestra, the University of New Mexico Symphony Orchestra, and so she's had a noted career.
How about your other sister?
Nancy. Nancy's my younger sister. Nancy is a very talented singer as well, although she didn't have the career that Priscilla did. Nancy attended school in Pelham with me, and she came to the University of New Mexico, and then she transferred to Smith College, where she graduated. And then she's lived in New Mexico and Albuquerque all her life. And she married Bill Briggs. They had several children, and two children. And she has been involved in various civic activities. Mostly she's interested in music and in art.
Where did you go to elementary school?
I went to the Colonial School in Pelham, New York, which was just 4 blocks from our home. So I walked to school every day.
And high school?
Pelham Memorial High School.
And where did you go to college?
I went to, I started at Yale. I spent my first year at Yale, and then my parents moved to New Mexico, and my father wanted me to get acquainted with our new home. So I transferred out to the University of New Mexico, and I was supposed to stay 1 year, but I ended up staying 2 because the Navy wouldn't let me transfer back. I was in the Naval ROTC. So I spent 2 years at the University of New Mexico, and then I finally finished. Then I went away in World War II in the Navy. And then after the Navy, I decided to go directly to law school after only 3 years of college. And there was only one law school in the country that would accept me under those conditions. It was the University of Minnesota, where they would take you and give you 4 years of law in lieu of your senior year of college.
You were in the Navy during World War
Yes.
II. Did you see any combat?
Yes, in the South Pacific.
I see.
Yes, I was on a destroyer, and we were involved in a number of naval engagements, which were very tough. The worst thing that happened to us was in a typhoon, where we lost 3 of our destroyers right in the same screen that we were in. We were getting ready to protect the aircraft carriers and the battleships on General MacArthur's landing on Luzon, as he had returned to the Philippines. And this typhoon hit, and it wiped out a lot of the ships. They lost most of the 800 sailors that were on those 3 destroyers with us. It was a tough thing. We rolled 70 degrees at one roll, and I thought for sure we were going to capsize. 110 knot breeze, 70-foot waves. It was just unbelievable.
So that was a memorable.
Yes, that was a very memorable occasion. Then there were some funny things that happened too, and that is, I was in charge of the smoke screen generators, which were supposed to emit smoke and screen our ships when they got in battle. And one of them blew unexpectedly during a rendezvous that we had with all the battleships and the carriers, and it plastered the bridge of Admiral Halsey's flagship. And we got some terse messages back and forth. What are you doing? Get rid of that smoke. But our skipper had to make a choice of whether he was going to abandon this tank and 3 others that they couldn't detach it from, or they're going to let it go because we were going to need it when we were going into action. And so he gutted it out, and we got a bad reputation, and we got assigned to almost a suicide mission shortly after that. So I was blamed for that because I was the torpedo officer and in charge of the...
Did you see action?
Oh, yes, yeah. On the suicide mission, we had to go within 400 miles of the Philippines, where they had 600 Japanese bombers, and pretend as though we were Admiral Halsey's fleet, with a lot of deflectors and various kind of radar events, and then transmissions indicating we were a big carrier task force, while the big force actually was not with us at all. We were the only ship. They were going up north to make a foray, and they didn't want to let the Japanese know they were doing that. So they were inviting all those 600 bombers to come after this one little ship. And we were lucky because the Japanese sent out a airplane to scout us, a seaplane, and they saw we were only one dicky little destroyer, so they didn't bother to go out and bomb us, but we came very close at that time.
Have you been involved in any veterans activities?
Not really, no. We have a reunion that we have with the graduates. We trained in the Naval ROTC at the University of New Mexico, and so we have a lot of friends there. Every year we get together, usually over the weekend of the homecoming, and so we exchange war stories and what's happened, and that's been really the limit of my activities.
Why did you choose to go to law school?
Well, that's a good question. My father had gone...
went to law school.
Yes, I went to law school, and my father had been a lawyer, and I had always thought of becoming a lawyer. But when I was at the University of New Mexico, I had a teacher teaching law who was not a lawyer, and I got the worst grade I'd ever gotten in college. And so I had decided not to become a lawyer, but then I was going to be a Navy lawyer, since I was in the Navy, until I found out I had to do 7 years of sea duty. So when in Charleston, South Carolina, Peggy and I one night decided that she didn't want me gone all that time in the Navy, and maybe I should just go to law school, because then I was thinking at that time that I would really like to go into law. So we made that decision, and that was right after World War II.
And you went to University of Minnesota.
Yes, exactly.
And how many years did it take you to complete your law degree?
Well, we did it. I went full time, so we did it 4 years and 3 years. And we had an interesting experience at the beginning. The dean of the law school, who was a very stern man, and the first freshman lecture, he said, "Look at the person on the left of you and the person to the right of you. At the end of the first year, none of you will be here."
It looks like you survived.
Well, I was a survivor. In those days, the standards were not as tough, and so a lot of students actually bilged out at the end of the first year.
Now, you mentioned Peggy. Can you tell me about when you married?
Yes.
And who you married?
Yes. Peggy Height was a gal from Gallup who came to the University of Mexico, and I met her at a freshman mixer the first night I was there, and I was overwhelmed. She was such a beautiful gal, but I could hardly dance with her because there were too many guys cutting in, and that started our acquaintance. We dated a few times, and then I went off to the war. When I got back from the war, I knew she was the gal, and I proposed, and she waited 3 days before she told me she'd marry me.
Now, was she a native of Gallup?
Yes, her grandparents actually came to Gallup in a covered wagon, so she's really a pioneer.
How many children do you have? Could you tell me about each of your children?
We have 6 children. The eldest is our son John. He's a worldwide missionary. He travels all over the world on various prayer ministries. He's ministered in 120 countries. In fact, he's just coming back from Malaysia, where he headed up 2 conferences he got in just last night. And he went to Yale and then went to seminary, and he's been active in the ministry since that time.
What denomination is he ministering?
Well, he's sort of non-denominational. He works for World Vision, which is a international relief and development agency, and they have a strong prayer effort.
Did he go to, where did he go to seminary?
He went to Trinity Seminary outside of Chicago.
And other children?
Yeah, our daughter Leslie, eldest daughter, she's a physician in Boston. She graduated from Harvard, went to Duke Medical School, and now she's involved in internal medicine, practicing at the Massachusetts General Hospital. She also has achieved some renown nationally because she's the editor of the Harvard Women's Health Watch, which is a generic health letter for women. And it's, in fact, she was featured in Newsweek magazine last year, and then she had another article with the Harvard Medical School this year. And they have 4 daughters. Then we have a daughter who teaches at a Christian school in St. Louis, and a wonderful teacher. She invests her lives in her students. It's just she does more than just a classroom experience. And she has 2 children, and then we have a son who's a banker who lives in Austin, Texas, and his name is Brad, and they have 6 children. That's the biggest family we have, and he works for the Bank of America there. And then we have another son who is a investment. We have a son, David, who's our youngest. He's a venture capitalist, and he lives in Los Angeles. And he went to Yale. He graduated from the Harvard School of Business, and he's been active in raising capital for various ventures. And then we have a son just ahead of him, Jeff, who is a lawyer in San Francisco, and who practices maritime law, and that's the size of our family. 6.
How about grandchildren? How many grandchildren do you have?
Oh, you don't want to know.
Yes, I do.
Grandchildren, we have 19.
Okay.
And we're hoping to get 20, but we're not quite sure.
20 would be a lovely.
Yes, it would be great.
Could you tell me about your legal practice?
Yes. My legal practice has varied quite a bit. When I first started out, I was involved in doing real estate work, reading abstracts. That was before the title companies did all that. I was involved in trial work, defending insurance companies largely in connection with our insurance practice. And that's for the first few years that I was in practice. And then it shifted pretty dramatically in a little bit after the mid-'50s when uranium discoveries were made in New Mexico. And from that, I began shifting. I got involved in some major litigation, and I continued with a series of major litigations for quite some time. So uranium became the focus of my practice for quite a number of years during the late 50s, the 60s, and into the 70s. Since that time, I have been involved in continuing in mining work and environmental work. And then I went of counsel with my firm back in 1993, although I still actively practice law.
Have you always been with the same firm? And
Yes.
Tell me about the firm and how...
I've always been with the Rohde Law Firm, and I practiced law on my own. Oh, I forgot to tell you, I practiced law on my own for a year. And it was 1950, there weren't many jobs available, and I had a great time. I tried 7 felony cases as appointed counsel, which was a lot of fun. And it was a learning experience for me. I'm not sure it was so good for the defendants who I represented. But, well, I got 2 acquittals, so it was an interesting time. And I had some interesting experiences there. And then the Rohde Law Firm asked me to join them, Bill Sloan primarily. And so I've been with the Rohde Law Firm ever since.
When was the Rohde Law Firm founded?
Back in 1883 by Bernard Rohde, who was some kind of a noted gentleman. He was a U.S. attorney in Alaska for a while. He was the United States District Judge in Puerto Rico for a while. But most of his time was in New Mexico, where he was a member of the legislature. He was a member of the Territorial Congress, and he was one of the chief sponsors of the University of New Mexico bill in the state legislature. So he has received, like, the Rohde Theater there is named after him. So he was quite a noted gentleman.
Was the Rohde Law Firm a prominent law firm in New Mexico?
Well, I considered it so. That was the only firm that I really was interested in joining when I came to New Mexico after law school. And but at the time, they had no openings. So I waited, and then I finally got it. The 2 largest firms then were the Sims firm then, which is now called the Model firm, and the Rohde firm. And when I say large firms, we had 6 lawyers and they had 5.
How many lawyers does Rohde now have?
We have in the 72 or 73.
And where are the offices of the firm?
We're located in the First Plaza downtown, a big tower next to the Hyatt Hotel.
And where do you have other offices in the state?
No, we just have one.
And you mentioned that you were active in uranium cases.
Yes.
Did you have any particular experiences in your uranium specialty?
Oh, lots of them. There's probably not enough time to tell them all of them. The first one we had was kind of a titanic case because it determined what later became the largest uranium deposits in the United States in the Ambrosia Lake area. And it was a fight between 2 ranchers and over the construction of a deed. And the question was, did the deed reserve the minerals? And the deed seemed to say that it reserved the minerals in favor of the other family, the Mclaughlin family, and we represented the Berryhill family and a mining company that had acquired their rights. And when we got the case, we wanted to find out what had happened during this meeting where the deed was signed. And so we ran down a woman near San Francisco who had been the notary public. They didn't have a lawyer. They just had a notary public. And she remembered distinctly that our client had said, now you understand that I'm keeping the minerals. Well, that would sound pretty good to us, but the deed didn't really seem to say that. So we had quite a titanic battle over that, a lot of lawyers involved, and there's a lot of uranium. They just started drilling, and they knew there was a lot of uranium. And we finally settled it. It was before Judge Rogers, and we were ready to fight it out. But we knew we were on the losing side, or they're probably going to lose it if we went to trial, because the testimony of our witness was 35 years old. And your recollections are not that strong 35 years later. And we were afraid that Judge Rogers, who was a great person for the printed word, was going to say, I can't go by somebody's recollection 35 years ago. I'm going to have to go by what the deed says. And so we settled it on the courthouse steps when the judge called us in the chambers just before the trial and said, somebody is going to win this case, and somebody is going to lose everything. Now, he said it in graphic language. I am being very kind in saying that he said somebody's going to lose everything. He said, there's no grays in this case. I read the depositions. It's either black or white. And he said, there aren't going to be any compromise if this case goes to trial. So you better go out and try to settle this case. And so we did.
What year was that?
Oh, my goodness. Let's see. It was in the 60s, 1960s, the early days of the uranium business. And then I had a lot of interesting cases in the uranium business that were really quite interesting for me.
And just for the recollection of our viewers, what happened to the uranium industry in New Mexico?
Well, it ran out of gas when they stopped building nuclear reactors. And after, 3 Mile Island really had a big impact on the whole industry, and the need for uranium just dropped out. The government support had dropped. The uranium industry was propped up during World War II and for many years after that by government purchasing, and that stopped. So the uranium business basically stopped, and our client had the biggest mill in the country, I believe. It certainly was the biggest mill in this area.
What was your client?
Kerr-McGee. And we had been against them in one of the cases, and they liked what we did, so they hired us after that. And so we did a lot of work for them, and a lot of major litigation, which was kind of fun.
There was a very famous case during the 70s, United Nuclear. Were you involved in that?
Yes, actually.
Could you talk a little bit about that case?
Yeah, that was by far the biggest case I'd ever been involved in. And
Tell us.
Yes, the case involved a uranium supply agreement. And we represented the middleman who had acquired the rights to buy uranium from a mining company at $13 a pound. What happened was, after we had this long-term contract, the price of uranium went from $13 to $30. And the supplier said, we don't want to supply anymore. And so it's commercially impracticable for us to do that. And so they sued us. And that was a huge case. There were probably 20 lawyers on our side. Our firm was involved. The model firm was involved. We became chief counsel for the case, and it was one of the longest cases in terms of manpower hours that I think in the history of New Mexico. It involved $1 billion cold dollars, because the difference between $13 a pound and 30 was $1 billion. So if the mining company won, they were going to basically get the benefit of $1 billion. So a lot of resources went into the case, and it unfortunately had a bad result for our client because of some discovery problems that developed during the course. But we had 8 lawyers in our firm working on it, and we got the model firm involved, and we got the Montgomery firm in Santa Fe involved, and so it was a big thing.
Wasn't Ann Bingaman involved?
Yes, she was.
And was she on Ann Bingaman?
Yes, and she ended up playing a rather prominent. Ann Bingaman was involved in the case, and she played a prominent role in what turned out to be an antitrust case. It started out as a plain supply case, uranium supply case. It turned out to an antitrust case when discovery indicated that one of our defendants had been involved in an international uranium cartel, which they said had affected the issues in our case. And that became a very, very big thing. At that point, I, being involved as a uranium lawyer and a mining lawyer, really had to almost step aside for the major issues. And Jack Eastham in our firm took over a major responsibility for that. And then the oil companies did not want to use local counsel entirely. The stakes were too high. So they brought a firm in from the east that handled the discovery. And there were some discovery problems that developed with a judge in Santa Fe who was trying the case. And then the thing that really did our slide in was the fact that this same firm had represented the same defendant in Chicago before federal Judge Marshall. And they had, in the discovery on the same issues, had produced a whole cabinet full of documents that they did not produce in New Mexico when the same issues were involved and the same questions were asked. And the trial judge just couldn't understand that. So 6 months into the trial, the judge granted default judgment against our clients. We went 7 times to the New Mexico Supreme Court, 2 times to the U.S. Supreme Court. We won the issues before the U.S. Supreme Court twice in the same turn. But when the final votes were counted, we couldn't get the Supreme Court to reverse the default judgment. And so anyway, that was a very interesting case.
Now, after the uranium business fell off, what did you specialize in?
Well, I did a lot of things. You might say I didn't specialize in anything. I did some land work. I got involved in public utility law that I had been involved in for some time. We represented a large utility company from California that had a large plant here in New Mexico, and we did a lot of work for them. I did real estate. I did just a variety of things, but I didn't have of course, spent a lot of time on uranium from then on.
Are there any other cases in your memory that were particularly significant in your career?
Oh, sure. I've got lots of. There are a lot of significant cases. Some of them embarrassing too. I remember one time we tried in federal court a case where we represented a prominent realtor, and he had been involved with a land developer who developed some land up near Taos, and this was the time when Bobby Kennedy was Attorney General, and he had all these land fraud cases he was bringing in. This was one of those. So our client really was on the periphery, the edge of it. Bill Sloan and I represented, and Bill Marchianda represented the main defendant. And they called all kinds of distinguished witnesses, including Raymond Burr, who was the Perry Mason of the television series, going way back. And he didn't harm us very much. He just said he had an art gallery in Taos, and he read some magazine articles in the newspaper there that had talked about the merits of this subdivision, and he didn't say very much, but it was just kind of a grandstand play by the U.S. attorney. So I went to cross-examine him, and I said, so aren't you also Mr. Burr, known as Perry Mason, a great lawyer? And yes, he said, yes, I am. And so I started a line of questioning like that, and Judge Breton, who was proceeding, said, Mr. Robb, where's this line of questioning going? See? And I said, of course, the courtroom was packed. I mean, with Perry Mason testifying, everybody came. And so I said, well, Judge, I'm really not going anywhere with this. The bottom line is I couldn't go home and face my kids and tell them I didn't cross-examine Perry Mason. And then the courtroom just erupted with laughter.
Can you tell us the name of your client in that case?
Yeah, no, I'd rather not. But he was a leading realtor. And we had they accused him of fraud, and we had an ex-Chief Justice of the New Mexico Supreme Court who testified, an ex-governor who testified as character witnesses for him. And we finally got him off, but it was a very interesting case.
Any other cases that come to mind that were as exciting as that one?
Well, some of them, I've had some embarrassing experiences. At one time we went back to Washington, and we had a ranching client who had bought some land from the Bureau of Land Management, and they had a public sale. They declared him the winner. He paid his money. All we were waiting for was a deed from the government that they called a patent, and a delay for 2 years, and then the government decided to cancel the sale. And we had some U.S. Supreme Court decisions that said you can't do that. And of course, in modern day, you can't cancel a sale until you paid the price and been declared the winner. But the Secretary of the Interior had a regulation that seemed to say that he retained jurisdiction over the sale until the actual patent was issued. So we decided to sue back in Washington. So we got a distinguished law firm there. They helped us. They did most of the brief writing, and we came for summary judgment. And so I went back there for the argument, and 2 days before, the lawyer back there said, we've got a real bad deal here on this judge. I said, well, why is that? He said, this judge, who's the chief judge, federal court there, has spent his career as an assistant United States attorney defending the government in these very cases. So he said he's going to blow us out of the water. But you're from the country. He might be kinder to you. So what he was really saying was, you're a rube from the country. Maybe you can get away with this. So I get up to argue this case. It was a case that involved a lot of uranium. And in New Mexico, probably would have taken, the judge would probably allowed all day for it, because these were going right to the merits. The judge gave us 45 minutes. And I got up to speak. And the first question out of the box was, why are you here, Mr. Robb? I said, well, because we feel that we've been turned down illegally by the Bureau. He said, no. I said, what's the basis of the court's jurisdiction? And, I was pretty nervous because everything was depending on my oral argument, and I couldn't remember what the basis of the jurisdiction was. And finally, my lead lawyer from Washington had to prompt me on it, but that was one of my more embarrassing moments when I should have, of course, known that was the very basis of what was going on. So I've had some funny experiences like that in my lifetime. Another interesting time was we had quite a large uranium case in Ambrosia Lake. It involved the first 2 uranium mills that were built there, and involved the Homestake Mining Company and very notable people. The Donald Mclaughlin was the president of Homestake. He was a former head of the geology department at Harvard. He was chairman of the board of the University of California Board of Regents. I mean, he was a very eminent guy. We had a general from New Mexico, I won't say who it was, who also had distinguished himself as a former Secretary of War and ambassador to China.
Can you tell us who that was?
Well,
It would be nice for history. I mean, if he was...
well, it was General Patrick Hurley,
Okay.
and very imperious but very commanding figure. And he had hired me in the lawsuit, and then there was a gentleman, I can't remember his name exactly, a well-known financier who had about 50 companies who owned we all had interest in this mill, and it's called the Homestake New Mexico Partners Mill. And then Homestake, the general partner, went ahead and built a mill that really was in competition with this mill, right back to back with this one. In fact, used some of the facilities of the first mill. And so a lawsuit was brought on 2 counts. First of all, the group from New York, headed by General Hurley, were interveners. The main antagonists were Homestake on the one hand, and the other group that had a large amount of uranium that had committed it to this mill, but the mill couldn't handle it all. And so they wanted to get loose from the contract, and so there were a couple of main issues. And the general, when he hired me, summoned me to his palace up in Santa Fe, and he said, "Now we're going to win this case on my testimony." And he said, I talked to Dr. Mclaughlin when they had the big celebration for the Homestake Sapin. This was the competing partnership at the La Fonda in Santa Fe. He took me aside and he said, "I want you to know that we're getting into this deal here." And the general he told McLaughlin, "You're breaching your fiduciary obligations by having this competing partnership, and you shouldn't do that." So the idea was that was notice to the Homestake that they should not be doing this and that they were going to have to answer for it. Problem, we got in this long trial, and they brought counsel in from New York. I learned how to try the big lawsuit in that thing. They had 6 lawyers from New York, 5 secretaries. They rented a house. They really went after this. This was the group that was trying to break the contract and so they could divert their ore to another mill. And it didn't, because the first one didn't have sufficient capacity. So it was a big deal. And we had in this trial that it turned out to be a sort of a Pyrrhic victory. The court held, Judge Hatch was the judge, and he held that basically they could get some of the ore loose, but not all of it, and that there was a violation of the obligations that the general partner had, but the damages were very small. But in the middle of it, they had this titanic settlement conference, and they brought in all the big head wheels. I'd never seen all these big wheels. I was just a lawyer from Albuquerque, and here were these giants of all in the partners, and we had a dinner at the La Fonda. And then after that, they presented their settlement proposals, and General Hurley stood up when it was his term, and he said, if this settlement was approved, we wouldn't have any chance in this partnership of getting our ore produced. And he said, settlement's off. And there were no more discussions, no more talks. We just went to trial after that. But it was a very interesting trial.
What was the result of the trial?
Well, the result of the trial was a sort of a Pyrrhic victory for our clients and for the group from New York, because Homestake was held to be in violation of its fiduciary obligations. And it's a reported case. It's in the 10th Circuit. And so I can speak freely about it. But and then some of the ore was released, but not all of it. But it was, to me, that's how I learned to try the big lawsuit. When these lawyers came in there, and their lead counsel was a guy who was, I won't give his name, but he was a party guy. So at night, brilliant, but a party guy. So at night,
New York lawyer?
Yeah, he would go out and spend his evening having a lot of fun, carousing a little bit and having a lot of fun. And he had these other 5 lawyers who were working like crazy to put together the testimony for the next day. And so they would get him out of bed, and sometimes, they'd get him out of bed in the morning, get him going, give him a couple of cups of coffee, and put the script in front of him, and he'd go into court. And he did fine. He did great. He was
Can't you give us his name?
No, I'd rather not. I don't think so. He later on became the personal lawyer for Howard Hughes, and so he was quite a guy. So anyway, it was a lot of fun being involved with these big timers for a small country boy from Albuquerque.
Do you have any other cases or experiences in your practice that you want to share with us?
Oh, yeah, I want to tell you about Tall Chief. My first year of practice, when I had all these cases, there was an Indian, Oklahoma Indian by the name of Tall Chief. He was a one-armed Indian, and he was accused of forging a check. And he was an allotment Indian. He got government allotment, so he knew all about allotment checks. And so he had produced a phony government check, made payable to a phony United States district judge, endorsed it on the back, and went to a used car dealer on East Central and said, I want to buy a car. Well, this was for $5,000, which was a lot of money in those days. Here's in 1950, 51. And so he bought a car for $1,500. And the used car dealer said, okay, I'll take your check. And but he didn't give him the cash or a check in response. He gave him an IOU, which was kind of the first tip-off on the case. The moment the car left the used car lot, he calls the U.S. attorney, finds the check's phony. They pick up this guy before he's gone 10 miles. And so now he's been in jail. Well, when we looked at Tall Chief, and I was appointed pro bono counsel to represent him, we found out he'd been convicted 3 other times for forgery. So, but he wanted to go ahead and try the case. So I represented him. We went through the trial, and I tried to laugh the case out of court. I said, nobody got fooled by this used car dealer. Imagine giving him an IOU rather than a check, and calling the U.S. attorney before the car had hardly even left the lot. So the U.S. attorney is just playing games with us by going after this thing, and I really kind of ridiculed the whole thing. And when we got to went to go to the jury, the judge gave the instructions to Judge Hatch, and then he gave an instruction nobody expected. He said, somebody had asked us in the jury about whether the jury has the right to recommend clemency. Oh, I should have told you an important fact. I didn't put Paul Chief on the stand because I was really worried about all these convictions. And the U.S. attorney had blown it. He didn't have certified copies of the judgment of conviction, which he needed. And the only chance he would have to prove that would be if I put my client on the stand. And I gambled that maybe they didn't have those things, and the gamble paid off because Tall Chief goes to the jury, clean as a whistle. Judge Hatch didn't like that at all. He liked to see those guys get convicted. So he gives his long instruction on clemency. Now I want you to know clemency is the fountainhead of justice. It started in England, and you have the right anytime you want in any case to recommend clemency and to the judge. And I was furious because that was basically telling the jury, you convict him and I'll go easy on him. You know, you can just recommend clemency. Well, I knew that wasn't going to happen. Anybody who's got 3 prior convictions, it made him a habitual. And so I was furious. I get up. When the judge is finished, I say, counsel takes the most vigorous exception to the unsolicited instruction of the trial judge. So Judge Hudson spins around the bench. He says to the jury, I want you to understand that under no circumstances will you recommend clemency in this case, in which case I jump up again and say, Your Honor, that we object to that instruction. And so he dismisses the jury. He's furious, and his color's right in his cheeks. He comes back when he's calmed down about 15 minutes later. He said, now, Mr. Robb, what? I did what you asked me to. I withdrew the instructions. I said, no, Judge, you didn't withdraw them. You just told the jury that anybody is entitled to clemency, and the last instruction said, except this guy. This guy is so bad, don't you dare give him any. So then he finally goes ahead and calls the jury back in and starts all over again. He says, ignore all my instructions. So he instructs them from the beginning. And they acquitted Tall Chief. That was the last appointment I got from Judge Hatch. Anyway, that was kind of a fun one starting out.
Whatever happened to Tall Chief?
I don't know.
Was he ever convicted?
Probably was. I don't think justice was done in that case, but the bottom line was that it was kind of an interesting experience for me. And I had another one where it was kind of somewhat embarrassing. They used to be able to remove cases on workman's compensation to the federal court, and the statute permitted that. And then the Congress decided to change that. And the Congress adopted a law that said, starting July, this was in January, starting July 1st, no more cases can be removed from the state court to the federal court. So we went around and figured we'd had a bunch of cases pending up there that had been removed. And to our astonishment, in February, comes an order from the judge, from both judges, Judge Hatch and Judge Rudge, remanding all the cases to state court. Well, I kept waiting for the defense bar to rise up and say, you can't do that. The counter said it doesn't happen until July. Nobody did. So I decided I'm going to be the hero. So I filed a motion to reconsider because the law said that a decision to remand is not reviewable by the Court of Appeals, by appeal or otherwise. In other words, what they did was nobody could challenge it. So I decided I had to challenge it. So I get up there and I make a motion to reconsider, and Hatch presides. So I said, Judge, it says here in plain English, it says that it's not effective until July, and your honors have gone ahead and remanded these cases. That's in violation of the statute. The statute is clear. And then I made a mistake. Then I said, even federal judges have to comply with the law. The judge stammers for a minute, then he says, Mr. Robb, Judge Rogers is on vacation now in California. When he comes back, I'm going to review your conduct with him. So I go back and talk to Don Dickinson, our senior partner, and I say, look, here's what's happened. Well, he said you were perfectly right to tell the judges that they were wrong. They had no right to do that. It was a violation of the law, and it was. But he said you went too far when you said even federal judges have to do that. And he said, you can stick with this, but you'll probably get held in contempt. And so he persuaded me I had to go over and apologize to Judge Hatch, which I did. But anyway, I'm sort of an impetuous guy sometimes, and that was one of the times I was impetuous.
You said you seem to have had a lot of experience with Judge Hatch.
Yes, I did.
He was a
federal judge. He was a former U.S. senator. In fact, he was the author of the famous Hatch Act, that many of us know about, and very, very good judge, but very stern. He really ran his courtroom, and those were interesting experiences. But I could tell you a lot more experiences, but I know I'm using up your time, so I'll stop there. But
okay, well, what I'd like to do now is to go into your career in legal services, because you have been honored by the ABA for your legal services work. So could you tell us a little bit about your interest in legal services and what you have done in that area?
Yeah, I'd be delighted to do that, because that's been one of the most important areas of my life. It started in Albuquerque back in about 1955, when Dean Gozowitz and one of my brother-in-law, Dean Gozowitz was the first dean of the law school and had founded the Albuquerque Legal Aid Society. And we had a part-time lawyer, Margaret Daly, who worked in the society, and they persuaded me to join the board. And I had been struck by my law practice about the fact that I had two cases in which the other side was not represented by counsel, or was represented by counsel who didn't really do much of a job to represent them. And these were all cases where people who really couldn't afford to pay much of a fee, and in one case, not at all. And I saw what chance they had in court, very little, against a large law firm that was large in those days, but 6 lawyers. But they had no chance really in there, and I could see that poor people really didn't have any chance under the law. And I was really struck by that. And I had thought to myself at the time, when I debated whether to go there, I ought to join this Legal Aid Society, because I really believe that I'm an officer of the court. I have an obligation to see that the justice system works for poor people as well as for rich. We represent rich people largely. And I don't have a chance really to do that. And this is an opportunity maybe to see if we can make the wheels of justice work a little more fairly. So I joined there and was impressed by the work they were doing, but they were so overmanned that we could hardly ever go to court because we didn't have the time or the energy or the money, and we just had a small pittance for support. And then something interesting happened. The fellow who was the executive director of the National Legal Aid and Defender Association, by the name of Junius Allison, he came to Albuquerque and visited our society. And I had dinner with him, and we sort of struck it off real well. And then, to my amazement, about 2 years later, he engineered an invitation for me to join the board of the National Legal Aid and Defender Association, which was the national organization that had the functions of setting up standards for legal aid agencies and also for promoting legal aid. At that time, legal aid had 240 programs around the country, but all of them were struggling because they had very little funding. And so I went to my first meeting at the bar, the first meeting of the board, and met lawyers of that tremendous stature and tremendous commitment for the poor. I was blown away by what I saw. The first meeting was at the Association of the Bar of the City of New York. And lawyers of the first rank began arriving that I had never thought of before. White and Case, Cravath, just a whole Simpson, Thatcher, and Bartlett. Some of the great names in the thing, and the senior partners were there. And I got there a little bit early, and I took the subway from my hotel, and here these limousines started pulling up with these lawyers, which gave me an idea. And what happened was, 3 of the lawyers in the room that night on the board became presidents of the American Bar Association.
Can you tell us who they
Well,
were?
Orison Marden was one of them, and let's see, Orison, and I'm trying to think who they all were. Bernie Siegel, I forget the name of the third. But I had no idea of the stature of these people, and one of them was the founder of one of the great New York firms. And here these men, who were at the top of their profession, were spending a lot of time directing this National Legal Aid and Defender Association. And mostly they were lawyers from New York, Boston, Chicago, and Philadelphia. Those 4 cities, basically, and they were the leaders of the bar in their own area. And so I was amazed. Here I am, a rube lawyer from Albuquerque, sitting among these giants. And I learned something about public service from them that I've never forgotten. And then I served on that board, and then Ross Malone, who was not at the meeting but became president of the American Bar Association, and he appointed me to serve on the committee, the Standing Committee on Legal Aid and Indigent Defendants, because of my service with the National Legal Aid and Defender Association. And then in 1966, the President Johnson had initiated the war on poverty, and the question had come up whether or not that war on poverty should include legal services. And there had been negotiations between Sergeant Shriver, who represented the Office of Economic Opportunity, which was the President's main organization to go ahead and help poor people in a way that they'd never been helped before, negotiated with the head of the American Bar Association, who was Lewis Powell, and later became a United States Supreme Court justice. And the deal was struck that the ABA would support it and try to get the state bars to go along if the program was completely professional, that complied with the ethics and standards of the law profession, and if the ABA would be given a very strong role in a national advisory committee that was to be formed that would basically supervise this organization. And that was as strong a position as they could get, because no advisory board can set policy, but they can certainly recommend it. And Sergeant Shriver indicated he would give very strong attention to their recommendations, and he was as good as his word. So at that point, Orison Marden, who had been at this first meeting at the NLADA, became president. So he appoints me as chairman of the committee. And that started the 6 most exciting years of my life in terms of legal aid, because basically our committee had the function of trying to implement what had been decided. That meant setting up the standards and guidelines that were going to govern the program. It meant making appearances twice a year before the House of Delegates of the American Bar Association. It meant representing basically that program in the state bars, and many of them did not agree with this. And so my job, first of all, was to go around the country, mostly in the West, to try to tell the lawyers and the bar associations there that this was really a good thing. Some of them thought it was going to socialize the legal profession, and and some of them didn't want that system, because the system that they set up would be one where they had trained, well-equipped lawyers who understood poverty law and practiced poverty law to render the services. They wanted to parcel it out among the members of the bar, many of whom had no experiences at all with that. And so that was a big issue in those days, a big issue in Albuquerque. So I went around trying to present the program, and I really believed in my heart that this was the answer, that poor deserved to have specialists representing them, because most lawyers had no knowledge and no practice involving that. And so I got involved in a fight with the Albuquerque Bar Association because they presented a judicare program, which was one where all the lawyers were just going to have their hand in it, whether they had experience or not. And so Bernie Metzger and I teamed up, and we had a competing application that we submitted, and we won. We got it but I was not a popular figure in the Albuquerque Bar Association. I'd go to meetings and people would shun me like crazy.
Now, was this the Legal Services Corporation?
Yes, it was. Well, it had not been formed yet. Well, that wasn't formed until 1975, but that started it, and it was interesting. I had to go and testify in Congress twice a year, along with the president of the American Bar Association. It was routine for the first year, and then problems began to develop that have plagued the program ever since. And some of the people that were getting sued didn't like it. The farmers didn't like it. Some of the ranchers didn't like it because some of the rural programs were insisting that migrant workers be treated properly, and that the standards of the federal standards that governed that sort of thing had to be observed, and they weren't being observed by the farmers, who had made a living, basically. To their credit, they couldn't have survived if they had to go ahead and observe those standards. So it was a life and death struggle for them. And so the first struggle we had was in California. And there the farmers, who had been a potent political force in electing Governor Reagan, persuaded him that the program was no good and that there were a lot of violations. And so they made an investigation under Governor Reagan and found there were 300 serious violations. And these were supported by affidavits and all kinds of statements from all over. And I thought, oh my goodness, what have we done? Because our committee had voted the California Rural Legal Assistance Program the year before the outstanding program in the country. And here they were saying it was a crazy program. They were doing things they shouldn't do. And so the governor had the right to veto a program, but it was subject to being overridden by the director of OEO. So what happened was the director of OEO appointed
OEO, could you explain?
Yeah, Office of Economic Opportunity. That was the group that was charged by President Johnson in carrying out the war on poverty. And so he appointed 3 retired state Supreme Court justices to preside over a panel to hear the evidence. And so many people testified. I went to San Francisco and testified before the panel too. And that we considered it an excellent program, that we thought there were questions about the evidence that they had presented. And what had happened in the meantime, and I wasn't privy to all of this, but what had happened in the meantime was that the California program had done a very good job of running down these affidavits, and they found, to their amazement, that many of the affidavits were phony. The people who were supposedly signing them said they didn't sign them, or they didn't understand it when they did sign it. And so the case kind of collapsed. So I go to San Francisco to testify of why we thought this was a good program, and our experience was that it should be supported. And to my amazement, I wasn't cross-examined. The Reagan administration had decided not to show the report. Their affidavits had been so discredited that they didn't do it. But they would issue press reports after every day's proceedings saying what took place, but they didn't defend their case. But that was the first attack. And then the second one was when Senator Murphy of California, who was one of Governor Reagan's close political supporters, filed a bill in Congress saying that the governor should have absolute veto power over these programs. In other words, basically the state would control it. Well, that would have killed the program in California and many other states where we didn't have this political support that was necessary. And so that was the first big fight we had in Congress, and we were right at the center of that. And the ABA helped to marshal some of the state bar associations, and we had some fights in the Congress. We testified in Congress. We lined up supporters, and we won. And the Murphy amendment got defeated. And then we began getting these bills every year that would trim this power or that power off of the legal services program. And we had a fine program set up. These were not just government lawyers who'd been there 30 years and were bored and had 9-to-5 jobs, which sometimes takes place. These were young lawyers who were really eager to take up the cause of the poor. We had the most amazing young men, some of them honor graduates from the largest law firms, largest law schools, in the country, that came and became volunteers for us, some of them, and who were paid staff. So we were trying to defend what was really a very good program. And we really began running into trouble in 1969 and 1970. And at that time, Donald Rumsfeld was the head of the OEO. And he had developed a program to regionalize the program. We had established an elaborate system whereby the head of the legal services program, who had really been handpicked by us, a wonderful trial lawyer from Baltimore, would have decisions made that were supposed to be made by him by politicos at the state level. And we knew that would politicize the program in a way that the professional standards, all the objectives that the ABE had wouldn't be met. And so that was a mammoth struggle, because the president under Rumsfeld was determined that they were going to regionalize the program and prevent us from, we could hold accountable one national figure who was heading up the program. We could not do that with regard to every region in the country. No way we could police that. Well, we had Donald Rumsfeld has made himself well known today, and we know he's a very strong advocate, and he doesn't cave in easily. But he didn't recognize the fight that he was going to get. And we got many of the state bar associations to come to Washington, and we basically made him withdraw the regulation. Then he tried to do something else that was not quite as bad, but much the same. And we fought him on that. And then what he did was, he did something that to us was absolutely incredible. He fired Terry Lenzner, who was the director of legal services. He was one of the ones that we had handpicked, and his deputy. And that really brought down the roof. The bottom line was we finally made Donald Rumsfeld back down. And we won that battle. And then we decided, because there were so many issues they were raising. They wanted to deny us the right to lobby. They wanted to deny us the right to have class actions, which had been very important, because it was not only individual cases that were involved, but the system was set up so that the poor had no real chance in many situations. And so the solution had to lie in getting the law changed. And the routes of lobbying and class actions were the routes that had been followed in other areas, and we thought that that should be done for the poor. But then we began getting some arguments about that, and we decided that being in the office of the president, which was where the OEO was not going to do it. So we started a survey and studied a new home for legal services that would not be quite so politically sensitive. We looked at the Department of Justice. We looked at HEW, Health, Education, and Welfare, that had a fledgling legal services program. We looked at the Office of the Courts, Administrative Office of the Federal Courts, and didn't find any of them suitable. But we finally came up with a solution, and that was to set up an independent corporation, which is now known as the Legal Services Corporation, which would have a separate charter, would have a board appointed by the president, but would not have quite the same immediate political interference that we had been encountering in the office of the president. And that started about a 3 or 4 year battle. Actually, we got President Nixon on our side on that struggle. And finally, after about 3 years, we got the Legal Services Corporation started. And then we had the Titanic battles in 1994 when the Republicans took over the Congress, and a number of conservative congressmen set out to destroy the program with President Reagan's support. And that was a big Titanic battle where we almost lost that, because the Congress, the House, several times had all their committees voting to cut down the appropriations and eventually kill the program in 3 years. And each year we had to go and overturn the recommendations of the Appropriations Committee, which controls the pork. So nobody wants to fight them, but we managed to get majorities in each year. President Reagan had zero money in his budget each year. These are the 3 years for legal services, and each time we had to resurrect the program. And the only thing that saved it was the American Bar Association and the state bars that stepped up and said, no, you can't do that. And we came and had massive campaigns in Congress when the state bar presidents and people would come, and we would lobby. We'd fan out over the Capitol Hill, and we won it. But that was a tough battle.
And what is the status of the Legal Services Corporation today, and what is your involvement in it?
Well, today it's reduced in scope of what it can do, because as a result of those struggles, it became evident that the Congress would not support some of the conditions, the proposals, and some of the programs that we had going that looked as though they might be overreaching. They didn't like the lobbying. They didn't like the class actions. They didn't like the backup centers that provided help to the local programs. And so those were eliminated. And some of the greatest supporters, Senator Pete Domenici, is credited largely with having saved the legal services program in these fights, where he bucked his own party, his own president, in order to lead the charge in Congress. And I had the fortune of having worked with Senator Domenici over the years. And so I was very much involved with him in this effort. But so we lost some of those things that were stripped from the program by Congress. But in the process, in doing that, we began to gain bipartisan support. And so the bargain really was, if you will modify the program somewhat, then we'll go ahead and get you support from more Republicans. So that's what happened. And now we have a finger up. Is that the end?
Do you have, I want to know about the award that you won. And I'm interested in the Christian Legal Society that you're involved in, and any other community activities.
Yeah, we got a ways to go, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, okay, well,
I better not talk so much.
I Googled you, so I have all this stuff. And then my last question is going to be, what do you think is your legacy to the legal profession in New Mexico? So we have about another half hour or so. But
Yeah, I'm
you're
too young
going
to leave
great.
a legacy. Yeah.
Well, okay, why don't we walk around a little bit?
Sure, okay.
We talked about your testifying in Congress, and we left off with basically the status of legal services today. You did mention, so I'd like you to repeat it for the benefit of the program here, that as other social programs have been cut, legal services has managed to survive. Do you want to comment on that?
Sure.
Okay.
I mentioned earlier that sort of the trade-off that was made in cutting back some of the programs was to gain bipartisan support, which the program has had ever since that time. And nowhere was it more important than this year. Because this year, the domestic programs, as well known, are getting cut back because the war on terrorism, the war in Iraq, Afghanistan, has sopped up so much money that the president's budget cut almost all the social programs, including legal services. And the current status of the matter is that the House has come up with a version that will not only eliminate the $20 million cut that the administration had proposed, but will also provide for a $10 million increase. And the Senate now has come up with even more generous appropriation of $30 million. So the two houses will have to get together. But either way, it looks almost certain as though in this year of declining revenues and declining support for social programs, legal services is going to come out ahead and probably end up with about $20 million increase over what it had last year.
Are you currently involved in any legal services activities?
Oh yes, yeah, I've been heavily involved in that effort. I was back in Washington in May at the ABA day, and I called on all of our congressional delegation at that time, including Senator Domenici. I had the shortest stand-up conference I've ever had with the senator there, with Judge Nan Nash, who was with me, and the senator's schedule was so crowded that he only had time for a stand-up conference, but he agreed to support us, and he was a key figure in getting the $30 million increase from the Senate. So, Heather Wilson was very supportive. Jeff Bigeman was extremely supportive. He was so supportive that even though he was on the Senate floor, he brought his chief of staff and his chief legal counsel in for a conference room that he has there in the Capitol, and he spent 30 minutes with us. And that was almost unheard of for a senator to spend 30 minutes. So Senator Jeff Bigeman was very supportive as well as Senator Domenici.
Are you currently doing any legal services representation?
Yes.
Could you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'm involved with a Christian legal aid program in terms of everyday service, face-to-face meetings with people. We have the concept started about 20 years ago when my experience with the national program, the legal services program, which was federally funded, was that we were encountering many times clients who had repetitive problems. Often they were relationship problems. A person would come in and he had a problem with his wife that got resolved. Then he had a problem with his next-door neighbor. Then he had problems with his boss. And it was obvious that something was going on in that person's life that couldn't be dealt with by the legal services lawyers, who couldn't be involved in spiritual matters or matters that were other than bare legal problems. And they couldn't, of course, because they were federally funded. And we began to experiment here in Albuquerque with the program. We got the Christian Legal Society, a national society of Christian lawyers and judges and law students, to give us some support, a small grant, to get started on an experiment to see, does God have some kind of a defined place in a legal services program? And so Albuquerque was picked as the site to do this. And so I was heavily involved in that effort, and we found some remarkable things that took place in a number of areas, but the domestic relations area probably was the most important area because what would happen was people would come for counseling, and we would ask questions about, well, what have you done to save your marriage? And as Christians, we would say, do you have biblical grounds, which were things we were interested in. And if the answer was no to one or both of those questions, we would then try to say, well, we think that often we find they had not really done everything they could to save the marriage. These were marriages that were on the rocks. I mean, these people didn't come for counseling. They just wanted to know where to sign the divorce papers. I mean, so these were the toughest kind of people. Even the pastors had sent most of them to us because they had given up. And but we decided that with God's help, it might be possible to save some of those marriages. And so we would start counseling with them. We would invite the pastor to come in, the elders to come into the church and talk with a couple. Then we have a Christian conciliation service that was starting. We'd refer some of them there for counseling. And I would have said we might have saved 5 or 10%.
Is this a denominational effort?
No, it's interdenominational. We call it the Christian Legal Aid Program because it's mostly staffed by Christians. But there are no limitations on who we serve. We serve everybody. They don't have to be Christians. We serve Muslims, we serve Jews, we serve people from all stripes. The lawyers who serve are predominantly Christian. And we use biblical principles often. But the domestic relations was a good example of just one area where we demonstrated that God really had a place to play. Through this counseling and through collaborating with these other groups, 60% of those people, we had almost 500 people came across came to our offices for help, and in what were almost hopeless cases, and of those, approximately 300 of those marriages were saved. And it wasn't anything we did; it was God doing it. It was using biblical principles where they were talking about how important marriage was, and that it's not just one of these temporary things. It's a permanent, it's a lifetime thing, and that there needs to be much effort made in saving those marriages. We were stunned. We could not believe the results that took place. But that was happening in the business world too. We mediated disputes in a Christian manner, and many people who were not even Christians said, we like this, because what was happening is not only were the disputes being settled, which courts were doing a reasonably good job of doing, but the relationship was being restored. That was the important thing, because people emerge from litigation often with terrible, terrible anger and frustration that they carried with them the rest of their lives. It destroyed, literally, some of their lives because of the anger that they felt. But the Christian approach, the biblical approach, was to try to reconcile those disputes. And it's amazing what God did to reconcile those disputes. Business disputes as well as domestic relations. And we had people in those sessions coming out arm in arm who had been bitter enemies when they started. And that was the big difference. The relationship, the object was not just to handle the dispute, but to restore the relationship between the parties.
Has this program spread elsewhere in the country?
Yes, the program has spread.
Are you on?
Oh, yes, we are on now.
The program has spread, actually rather dramatically in recent times. Not at first. After we finished a 5-year pilot program, we wrote up our findings, we published them, and there wasn't a whole lot of interest. There were a few programs that got started in the late 80s and the early 90s, but they weren't founded on adequate funding. They weren't founded on basic principles. They just decided it was a good idea to start doing something like this, and a lot of those efforts failed. But the watershed event for me and for the Christian Legal Society occurred in 1996. 97, take it back. It was 1997. President Clinton called a volunteers conference for Philadelphia. That was a huge conference. Over 5,000 people came there. All the living ex-presidents were there. And the message was clear. Welfare reform, which had been in dispute for a long time, has now been adopted. Congress has spoken. The issue no longer is are we for it or against it. The issue is how we implement it, because it's the will of Congress to do this. So the volunteers were encouraged to go back to their communities and have the communities community organizations get involved in this, rather than just federal funding. Their statement was the federal government is stepping back. The communities, the churches, the organized groups have to step forward and fill the vacuum. I attended the part of the conference that was dealing with religious organizations, and mostly Christian organizations. And all the major Christian denominational groups. And the people who came were amazing. Not only, mostly they're the CEOs or the presidents, they were decision makers who came to that conference, which absolutely surprised me. And the convener, Jim Wallace, in his opening statement said, we have different views of many of these things. We have different theological views. We have different programs. We differ on all sorts of things. But can we agree on one thing? And that is that poverty needs to be eradicated. Poverty is a stain on all of us. We all have commitments. Almost every major religious denomination has something to say in its governing papers about the duty of people who do this to provide help to the people who cannot afford lawyers. And we were amazed about that. And we went, I was with the president of the Christian Legal Society. We went right back to the board of directors of the Christian Legal Society and said, you need to be the spark plug to get this going. At that time, we only had 4 programs that had survived the 80s and early 90s. And we need to tell the story, starting with the Albuquerque story, which pioneered in this thing around the country. And so they said, since I'd gone of council earlier that year, that since I had this vast legal aid experience, I should head up the effort. So I had a great time doing this. We got a little bit of money from them. We began to get groups together that were interested. We had started a national conference, and we have one every year now for the last 8 years, where we brought people together who were interested in this sort of approach. And I still am a great supporter of the secular legal services program. As like I mentioned, I'm still involved actively in lobbying in the Congress for that. But I think this has a different dimension. We don't have nearly the number of lawyers that we need to do this job. We don't have nearly the amount of federal funds that we need. We need more volunteers. And here's a whole body of volunteers, religious organizations, that have charters already in whether the Bible or whatever their governing bodies are, their instructions are. God is telling all of them that they have to have a responsibility for this. And so here's a big army of volunteers, and we're starting to volunteer some of them, starting to mobilize some of them. And we now have gone from 4 programs to 52.
Is there one in every state?
Not quite, but
some states
but
have
in
more than
yes,
one.
yeah, some states like Chicago have several, and but we're in over 30 now, over 30 states.
Do you have a set of guidelines?
Yes, we do. We have national guidelines that we developed so that we would be on the same page, so we could try to take advantage of our experiences that we had earlier. And I would say that probably the principles that we developed and that were published and adopted as national standards have been used in probably as many as 40 of the 52. Some of them have gone their own way and done other things, which is fine. Everybody needs to draw on their own experiences and go the path that they're led. But we were astonished at the growth of this as an addendum to the National Legal Services Program, not as a substitute, not any way in competition with them, but as an addendum dealing with certain problems that they could not deal with. And we cooperate with the Bar Association programs. We cooperate with the legal services programs. We are a member of a group in Albuquerque, for example, that goes and has monthly meetings of the legal services providers, the secular ones, and we meet with them. We cooperate with them. We have interview sessions, and I'm actively involved as a volunteer. I don't think I can direct a program if I don't know what's going on the ground floor. So I'm a volunteer, and we have weekly sessions at the Noonday Ministries, which is located right near downtown on the grounds of the First Baptist Church. But it's not a ministry of the First Baptist Church. It's broader than that. But so we interview clients there every Wednesday at 1 o'clock, and we have a group of 30 regular volunteers that serve in these programs. Then every 2 weeks we go down to the Albuquerque Rescue Mission, and they'll go down to Joy Junction. And we hit pretty much single men in the two downtown programs, but Joy Junction has families. So we deal with families there, and the issues are somewhat different. But and now we're starting a preventive law program. Our premise is that the system simply cannot handle all the problems of the poor. And if you can keep people from getting in trouble with the law in the first place or getting in trouble legally, what you're doing is you're removing all that group from the system, and also the tremendous disability that results from getting involved in the legal system. It is very, very, very damaging to the immediate family, the extended family, not just to the person who's involved. And so we deal mostly with homeless people. And the ordinances in the city of Albuquerque, like most cities, are really, really targeted to homeless people. The merchants don't want them around. A lot of the businesses don't want them around. And so you can't loiter, whatever loitering means. You criminal trespass, urinating in public, drinking in public, many of these minor offenses. And what's happening is that sometimes the people who receive citations for these things don't understand them. Often they lose the citations, and so they miss the hearing. Sometimes they're stoned at the time. Quite a number of these people are on drugs, and so the officer stuffs the citation in their pocket, and it's gone. And then something very serious happens. These are minor offenses. If they went to court and talked to the judge, they'd get probation. They'd get maybe a little bit of volunteer time, but nothing really would come of these things. But now, when they didn't show up for the hearing, they get a bench warrant, and a bench warrant is something else. That is a very serious thing. That will keep them, when they get their act together and begin to get reunited with their families or begin getting jobs. They cannot get a job because most businesses now run a background check on them. And this is a killer. You can't get an apartment. You want to get your family back together. The mom has been with the kids, staying with her family, and now they want to get the family back together. It's broken up. They can't get an apartment because the apartment owner won't rent to you. Some of the public benefits are denied. So we're dealing with all those problems. And we're involved with the homeless court, which is a wonderful thing that very few people know about. And it's not just for the Christian program. A lot of other programs are involved in that. But that's a situation where if someone is making a sincere desire to change their life, to get away from the street, to get away from the drugs, to get away from the lifestyle that they have, and get involved in some kind of a program, rehabilitation program of some kind, you can go to the court, the homeless court clerk, and you can say, we have this evidence that we're ready to present, but that person is scared to death they're going to get nailed and arrested for one of these bench warrants. And so they immediately quash the bench warrant. It's gone. And nobody has ever gone to jail up to now. Then later they appear in homeless court. The judge rules on them. Often they get dismissed. Many times they have to do some volunteer service. But nobody has ever gone to jail, and nobody as a result of this court. It's a wonderful thing for people who are serious about getting their problems dealt with. And the social workers come and testify that that person is a good candidate, and they come from all agencies all over. And it's a great thing, and we're involved in that, which we're excited about.
Do you do a lot of mediation, dispute resolution?
Not as much. No, we train. We have a training program for our lawyers. In fact, we just finished one 10 days ago. We have 7 new volunteers. We got 4 new lawyers and 3 new law students. And we train people on the principles of mediation. And because we're Christian, we emphasize Christian mediation and Christian biblical principles for doing that. So we do get involved to some extent. But mostly rely upon pastors or elders of the church, mostly rely on trained people, counselors, that are in Noonday, actually Noonday doesn't have much of a staff there, but Albuquerque Rescue Mission does, and Joy Junction does. So we try to get them involved with good counseling that will help them along in solving some of these disputes. And it's amazing how often those disputes get resolved when they sit down with trained counselors and go through that. So we train our lawyers on some of the things, but we don't have enough time to do real training of that.
Very, very exciting and very promising.
Well, I really enjoy that, and it's just to be able to sit down face-to-face with some of these people and hear their problems. And sometimes you can't do a thing for them. I mean, sometimes the programs are hopeless, but you can give them hope. That's the thing that I really like about this program. These people mostly are very discouraged. Nobody wants to hear their stories. nobody wants to deal with them. They're a pain in the neck to a lot of people, and they're so used to being rejected that the fact that lawyers who are successful will come down and spend their time interviewing them. And we go down. We interview on site. We don't interview in our law offices. We go down on the site, on the barrios, or the place where these people hang out, and we interview them right there on the grounds where they feel at home. And we show them that we care for them and we care for their problems. And that alone, if we did nothing else, that gives them some hope that we say, now here's some things you can do to change your life or to get involved with some of these problems. Lawyers can't always help you, but here's some of the things you can do with lawyers. Here's some of the things you can do with others, with your family. And so and you can do it. You can do it. And by giving them that hope, that may be the most important thing we do. Although I like to think we do a lot of legal help too.
Well, that's very, very exciting. Now, you just received an award from the ABA. Could you tell us what that award was?
Well, yes. It was yes, the award I received was the Advocates Award. It was the first ever awarded by the Government Affairs Committee of the ABA, primarily for services in connection with the national program, lobbying efforts and the things that we've discussed about going way back to the 1950s and 60s. It was a very humbling experience. The president of the American Bar Association was there, all the members of the Board of Governors, many members of the House of Delegates, many from the state. There were about 300 people there at that thing. It was ABA Day when we were fanning out across the hill to talk to the representatives and senators about issues that are important to the American Bar Association. And legal aid is at the very top of the list. It always has been. That's what makes me proud to be a lawyer. The efforts that the American Bar Association and the state bars have done to try to deal with this very, very difficult problem is one of the proudest moments, I believe, that will be in the history of the bar associations. But anyway, that was an award that they gave me. It was very nice. They had me do some televised interviews, and Helene Barnett was there, and just about all the people that I know who were involved in legal services. That was a pretty exciting experience.
What do you think your legacy is to the legal community of New Mexico?
You know, I hate to think of legacy at this point because I feel more like 62 than 82. I really don't think that I'm done, and I'm actively involved in so many of those things and expect to continue to do. I hope that what I feel called to do, and I have a passion about this, I hope that it would be an example that other lawyers would like to follow. Many are doing this. I'm just one of many lawyers getting involved in this thing, which is it's an unknown history of the legal profession, of the work that's being done by volunteer lawyers and by paid, compensated lawyers that are very much undercompensated. Lawyers are working for $30,000 a year when they could go into the private practice and make 90 or 100. And so all of those people are giving volunteer services as far as I'm concerned. And there's a whole army of them. We have, in our Christian Legal Aid program alone, we have 900 volunteers now all over the country. And the Legal Services program has many more than that. And these are only part-time lawyers. They have more than that, and they're full-time. But here's a whole group of things. And I think being involved in these things and saying, this is important. You've got to take time away from your law practice to do this. And I got to say that, to me, that's why I practiced law all these years. One of the main reasons. I think otherwise I probably would have given up practicing law a few years ago. But the fact that I can be used, whether it's in a Christian program or a secular program, to help other people, that has been the most satisfying thing I can say. In the 50-plus years I've been practicing law, nothing has satisfied me nearly as much as that. It's exciting to do that, and I just praise the Lord, and I praise the Bar Associations that they let me do it.
Is there anything else that you'd like to say in this interview that you'd like to have go down in legal history?
Oh, you bet. Sure. There's lots I'd like to say, but let me start with my family.
Okay.
I want to express my support for my wife, who is stuck with me. We've been married now 60 years, and she has supported me in these efforts, and I could never have done it without her. And she has paid a price for that because I was gone a lot, particularly during the years when I was more active than perhaps I am now. And in rearing the children and in doing some of the things around the house that a husband should be doing, when I was off legal aiding, and I certainly want to thank her for that. I want to thank my partners in the law firm. Without their support, I never could have done this, and because this took major time off from the billable hours that I was able to do for the firm. So I want to thank the Rohde Law Firm for their support. I couldn't have done it without their support. And there are a lot of things I would like to say, expressing my gratitude for the fact that I've had the opportunity of doing this. Here's an unknown lawyer from Albuquerque, New Mexico, that nobody ever heard of, that suddenly got escalated into a position where they could really make a difference. I love one-on-one conferring with clients, but the bottom line is the lobbying work, the work that's done in Washington with the Congress and with the administration. Sometimes you can affect the lives of hundreds of thousands of people. And so you have an opportunity, to have a rare opportunity to be able to have some influence on that process. And so to me, that has made my professional life really worthwhile. I always say the law practice satisfies me up here mentally. It's very challenging. I love practicing law, but legal aid does something for me in the heart. This is a heart affair, and that's why that's why I love it so much, and why I don't ever want to stop doing it. And until the day I die, I hope I'm doing it.
Well, thank you very, very much for, I think, an incredible interview, and we look forward to many more years of your service and your leadership, particularly in the area of legal aid and in helping people get the representation to which every human being is entitled. Thank you so very much.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Okay. I think this is going to be absolutely wonderful. Okay, well, thank you so much.
Well, thank you for asking me.
Can you do one more line for me? Can you, I just want to get a little bit of a wider shot. Can you talk about how it challenged you mentally, but also, because you pointed to your heart, and I didn't get your hand pointing to your heart, and I would like to
you
get
said
that.
it is not only has a challenge you mentally, but it's also gone to
That would be
He
great.
wants that again. Okay.
Yeah.
Can we put that in? Can we stick it in somewhere? Okay, we can. All right.
The law practice has satisfied me incredibly mentally. I really enjoy the mental processes that we go through. I like being a part of a system of justice. I really think handling cases for clients has been a very rewarding thing. But most of that is physical and mental involvement. What happens in legal aid work is you have that, but it's an affair of the heart, too. You have your heart. It's such a satisfying experience for you when you can actually be of help. These are the most helpless of the helpless, the homeless people that we deal with primarily. And the fact that some lawyer advocate will go and step up and help them, the fact that you can have a small role in doing this is one of the most satisfying experiences that any lawyer can have.
Got it. It's a wrap, huh?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Well, I am thrilled.